optimistic. You're naive.
Hello everyone, this is the Pineapple Grenadier, and this is another episode of the Pineapple Grenadier Talks About Stuff. This is a non-scripted video. I do have some scripted stuff that's being planned for 2023. I have a lot of interesting stuff, including, for some reason, 2 videos on Madagascar, a video on Mitchells vs. the Machines, a video on Dan Versus, and another one on Molly McGee. I have a lot of really interesting stuff planned out for 2023, but instead of talking about any of that interesting stuff, what if we talked about Velma? Ooh, what if we talked about that? So, I'm recording this the day after the first 2 episodes of the new HBO Max show had just come out. I didn't have any plans to talk about this, because it's unscripted, but it's like this was just like the most bewildering set of premiere episodes I've ever watched. And I just felt like I really needed to get my thoughts out, because, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that I think is worth critiquing. Whatever, it's unscripted, right? Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's worth critiquing, but I also think there's a lot of stuff that has a lot of potential, and I think that's worth exploring. So the rundown. I wasn't really paying too much attention to when the show was announced. I'm not gonna lie to you, I really don't remember like a whole lot about like the beginning details. I think there was like a leaked screenshot, and everyone's like, oh, this is gonna be really mid or whatever, and I don't know. I mean, I thought the style looked fine. I still think the show looks really good. I didn't watch the trailer, but I did watch the Comic-Con teaser. And I thought that was kind of like a decent like microcosm of what we're gonna get. I thought the beginning bit about Velma ranting about like a Jetsons reboot or whatever was kind of tacky. But there's a lot of nice lighting. I thought the new design for Velma looked nice in animation, and the teaser itself had a really fun twist. So it's like, I don't know, it just felt like, hey, maybe this could be fun. Maybe this could be a really interesting thing. My main goal with this is just to see, hey, is this a fun thing? Could this show grow into something much more interesting, right? I remember when I started watching the first few reviews for Inside Job, right? And everyone's like, oh, it's a Rick and Morty ripoff. All they do is say pop culture references, whatever. And then a year or 2 later, it's the most beloved cartoon of the past 2-3 years. So I don't know. Maybe we should just let Velma Dinkley cook, right? Let's see what she's cooking. Okay, I'm not gonna do a big synopsis about the show. I feel like you know what you're getting into, right? It's a Scooby-Doo reboot. It's your bog standard garden variety murder mystery teen drama, whatever, right? It's whatever, you get that, right? I'm also not going to do a play-by-play of the 2 episodes, but I am going to do a quick breakdown of the very first scene, because it is very much the definition of insanity. It is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen anything. Okay, so our first, introduction shot is of Crystal Cove High, Crystal Cove High School, which I think is kind of I think that's the first thing is okay, so this is set in Crystal Cove where Mr. Incorporated was set up. I guess that's what, writers decide, if they have street cred or whatever. This is a real Scooby-Doo show. That's why we're sitting in Crystal Cove. But it's not a whimsical tourist trap Beach Cove town or whatever. It's just bog water suburbia or whatever, so it's not that interesting. Then we get introduced to Daphne, and I guess she got back from gym and she's gonna take a shower or whatever, and and then she sees a bunch of cockroaches humping, and then that's, I don't know, it's a very bizarre intro to the show. The next bit is where more insane stuff starts happening, and pardon me for not showing any intro, any beginning intros of the show or whatever, because okay, I just gotta get into it, right? I don't know, the footage might be me playing multiverses or whatever. Okay, so yeah, so first off, right, man, I can't believe I'm gonna talk about this. Okay, so first off, like, right, so like I guess Daphne's like hanging out with like her gang or whatever, and they're all showering together, and like everyone's naked, and like, first off, I didn't need to see any of this, right? Like, this first like 15 seconds, like no, not 15 seconds, like 3 minutes of like this intro is already like insane, right? We have like you have the cockroaches, and then you have everybody like basically being naked, and it's like, okay, yeah, I don't need to see any of this. I'm so livid. I didn't need to see any of this. The next most insane part is when I guess they start talking about like TV shows or whatever, and it's like, oh hey, isn't it super weird that like the first episodes of like TV shows have a whole bunch of like nudity and sex scenes or whatever? And so like, first off, this is like a really weird way to start a conversation. Like, who starts like a conversation like that? Second off, I don't think like normal people, like not like, I mean like non-terminally online people do a whole bunch of like media analysis like this, right? Like, I have a few friends and we like discuss the themes of like the writings of shows that we watch or whatever, right? But it's like, I'm not gonna deconstruct like the theming of like a TV show with like my mom, like a coworker or something, right? Like, I don't know. And this is probably like the biggest thing I can probably say, right? It's like, I think just like the writing in general is just kind of like bizarrely verbose, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like you're just making like inane like meta references and stuff, right? And the thing is that it's like, we haven't even been introduced to Velma, right? And like, everyone's already talking like this, right? It would make more sense for Velma to be the only person who speaks like this, right? Who starts like randomly going on about like cliches in TV shows or whatever, or like bad writing or whatever, right? And then everyone's like, why are you talking to me? Why can't you talk like a normal person, right? Because like, Velma's the one who's like the terminally online, super jaded, like Redditor or whatever, right? Why is everyone else talking about this stuff like this, right? So then like, okay, so like they're going on about how, oh hey, this stuff is really cool, or oh, it's super cheap, and then they start getting into a fight. And then here's where we start getting our introduction to Velma, where she scares everybody away by like hitting everybody with a hockey stick. And so then Velma and Daphne get into an argument, and then Velma opens her gym locker, and then a person with their brains scooped out falls out, and that's the introduction to the show. Okay, there's a lot to unpack in that. Yeah, jeez. So yeah, I think we should probably just start talking about Velma, right? I think I like Velma in concept, right? I could say that about the show in general, right? Like, I think I'm subconsciously trying to like this show. But I don't know. I think like, this is like gonna be like my third video on this channel, right? So I think the thing you gotta realize about me is that like, I'm not like irony poisoned or whatever. I don't hate watch stuff, right? Like, you know, I made fan art. I drew Velma a pretty picture. Like, I don't know. I want to like this show. I want to. But Velma's making it pretty hard. So like, here's the big critique, the big criticism, right? So the whole concept, I think, around Velma, right, is that like, you know, she's a loner. She's, you know, petty and defensive. Because, you know, she doesn't have any friends or anything, and everyone makes fun of her, and, you know, that's the reason why she's super judgmental and everything, right? I think that's the idea, right? But, okay, so first thing, right? We don't get a real proper introduction to Velma, the status quo of her life, her relationships with everybody. That stuff gets kind of introduced, like, bits and pieces between the first two episodes, but the biggest issue is that we don't get an understanding as to, like, what the actual status quo is, right? Like, because, like, everybody hates Velma, right? Everyone hates Velma, but, like, it's hard to tell whether or not they hate her because everybody is dumb and shallow, or because everyone thinks that she murdered a girl or whatever, right? Like, I think that's the thing that gets kind of muddled, right? You could totally just, like, totally justify Velma being a jerk if, like, you just like made it so that it's her against the world, right? You know, everyone's messing with her, so she's super defensive and she isn't able to build lasting relationships because she's defending herself from being like emotionally hurt or whatever, right? Like that's the easiest thing to do, right? I'm immediately thinking about the Angry Birds movie in Red, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, we all like a jerk, a grumpy dude from time to time. All you need to do is just have a good setup, and you can make them likable, right? I mean, we all like Shrek. We all like Gru, right? Like, we like these guys. I mean, all you need to do is just have that decent setup, right? And you can make like a jerk character, likable, right? And like, that's not even in the case of like, that's just in the case of like redeemable jerk characters, right? So yeah, Velma doesn't really have a good character foundation, right? She doesn't have a good introduction into her relationships with the rest of the world, with Daphne, with her schoolmates, with her father. There isn't really a good foundation for all of that. So Velma, like, yeah, she might be super callous, but it's like that could have been justifiable, right? But even outside of that, it's like you really have to think about like the actual introduction to her character, right? She's trying to scare away all these people from the gym shower because she wants to like bathe by herself instead of waiting like a normal person, right? All right, like this is like like it's funny to think about, but like in practice, it's kind of like, geez, this is really weird. Like this is like the introduction to like our main character that we're supposed to be rooting for, right? And that comes into another big critique of Velma is that I don't know. I think her callousness isn't super funny or necessarily endearing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I really think the idea of like a big meanie Velma is very funny, right? Like, I don't know. I watch Mr. Incorporated. I play Velma in Multiverses. I don't mind snarky Velma, but like, I don't know. I think pushing Velma into an unlikable protagonist role, I think you gotta like, there's a lot of really specific things that you have to do to make that role entertaining and likable, even if you don't want to put in the work to change or redeem the character, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, I like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Pinky and the Brain, Rick and Morty. I might even indulge myself in a little bit of Ren and Stimpy from time to time. But like, what's the difference between all of those sets of characters and Velma, right? I can think of a few different things from the top of my head, right? I think one of the big things is that the recipient of the callousness and the meanness either deserves it or is way too stupid to even comprehend or be affected by that, right? Like, you have, Ren and Stimpy or Pinky and the Brain, right? Like, if one person is being mean to the other person, they can kind of do whatever they want because the person that they're being mean to, right, is so dumb that they can't even comprehend or be offended by anything that the person is saying or doing, right? It's like you're punching like a punching bag or a pillow or a piece of Play-Doh or whatever. It has no effect, right? I mean, the more tangible and real you make the callousness, the less funny it is. It's the reason why the earlier iterations of Tom and Jerry don't work, because having a realistic cat get hurt isn't as funny as an anthropomorphized cat being hurt. It's more funny to have something that's intangible and something that can't be affected by it. It's quick and it's something that can bounce back or can't even be affected by it, right? Another big thing too, right? I gotta think about this for a bit. Yeah, like, I think another big thing too, right, is that, especially when you have a character that's insulting a bunch of people a bunch, right? I think, like, something that can also help too is making the insults that they put out be so absurd that, like, the people can't even comprehend it, right? So it's like with something like with like Rick, right, where he's like insulting everybody around him, right? Half the time his insults are so bizarre that they end up going over the heads of anybody he's talking to, right? And I think that's another thing that can work really well too. Also, I think another third thing too is that, like, it doesn't linger too long, right? You don't have that sense of groundedness, right? Whatever insult or whatever is thrown at somebody, it's usually very quick, or we don't see the effects of it too long. Like, I think the thing is that, like, real meanness, it lingers, right? You know, like being nasty to someone, it lingers, right? But jokes need to be like snappy and funny, right? So it's like it doesn't linger too much so that it becomes hurtful, right? It's like, and I feel like these are like a few of the things that like the characterization of Velma kind of fails at, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I want to be on board with like this jerk Velma, but I think the biggest issue right now is that a lot of stuff she says to people just it isn't funny, right? And it's just like the quips aren't really like quick enough for it to like, okay, like, yeah, you said this and then it's done, right? Whatever, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, already people don't like her for the reasons why she's acting, and it just, I don't know, like, it just lingers on a little bit too long. I think about like the end of the second episode, right, where, you know, where like Velma accidentally accused Fred of being the murderer, right? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say accidentally, right? He was being kind of a creep, but like at the same time, it's like, you know, he's innocent, right? So Velma has to defend him at the same time admitting that she's wrong, right? And so, yeah, fine, right? She has to make a case for Fred being innocent, but she does it in like such a like a roundabout, backhanded way that loops around to insulting Fred, right? And it's like, in the end, it ends up backfiring, right? Because he gets so riled up and pissed off that he ends up getting arrested anyway. So she ends up undercutting herself anyway. But it's like, I don't know, you kind of sit there and it's like, yeah, this is kind of unnecessary, right? Like, you're trying to prove a point. Why don't you just get to the point that you're making instead of using it as a vehicle to make fun of Fred, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, like, it's just some of those things where it's like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it kind of works as well, right? Like, I don't feel like you need to like soften Velma, but I do think you need to like redirect, or at least give us a foundation for why she is the way that she is, right? We get hints about how, you know, Velma and Daphne had like a falling out or whatever, but like we don't really get to see like the effects of that before her being accused of murder, right? So it's like it's hard to really gauge necessarily whether or not she's acting the way she does, like necessarily out of like frustration for not having any friendships, or she's just that just because, you know, she just doesn't care about anybody, right? Yeah, but that's just like on the Velma side of like her personality. But when you get to stuff like the writing, right, it's just like, I don't know, it's like that kind of like obnoxious like meta commentary. Like, I don't know, like I think doing too much of it is sort of like it loses its luster, right? Because if you do a whole bunch of it, right, then it just stops being funny. And also it's not super complex. At least it's not as complex as you think it is, right? Like if you say, oh, this thing is cheap, and then you do the thing while you're psychoanalyzing it or whatever, then like it loses its effect. And it's frustrating too because, like I said before, it doesn't really make sense for like everybody to be talking like the way that they do. It just feels like this would be kind of the kind of thing that like would be reserved to Velma, right? Her being concerned about all this unnecessary stuff is kind of would make more sense for her character. And even then, most of the cases, it doesn't really feel like it's just kind of feels like you're talking about nonsense, right? Because like when you think about the actual beginnings of that scene, the girls are all talking about like sex scenes and whether or not they're effective or not, or whether or not they contribute to the story and the quality of the TV show. When Velma gets introduced, she starts talking about like recasting characters as minorities, right? Which I think is really divergent from everything that the girls were talking about in the first place. Like, yeah, sure, it's a fun enough like twist to say, oh wow, Velma's Indian in this show, isn't that crazy, right? But like, it's not even really relevant to anything, right? And then in the end, it ends up just being like a really lame like bridge for her to insult Daphne, so it ended up not really mattering anyway. But yeah, I don't know, I mean, looping back to like the whole like Velma character thing, right? It's kind of insane to think like, wow, all these characters are going to have to work together and become Mystery Incorporated, right? right? Like, how in the world is like Velma gonna like start working with any of these guys if she doesn't like or respect any of them? It's insane, right? I guess we should probably talk about the other characters too, right? It's weird. When I first heard about this show, right, I assumed that like they were gonna do like they're gonna make it was just like Velma's gonna be the only Scooby-Doo character, and there's gonna be like a cast of like a brand new cast of everybody. But yeah, as soon as things start turning around, it's like, oh, it is the same characters. They just look different. Well, at least they're gonna figure out interesting ways to incorporate their characters into this new format, right? Not necessarily, right? I mean, the foundations are kind of shallow, right? Like, it's like kind of like, think about what an adult parody of Scooby-Doo would look like, right? Like, okay, so like Daphne is vain and shallow, Fred is airheaded, and Shaggy's a nerd, right? I mean, they kind of try and subvert this thing with Shaggy where he's not into weed because it seems to be the only thing that everybody would have made in like an adult Shaggy cartoon, but like they draw attention to it too much for it to be novel, right? And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not like, you know, I have an issue with them changing legacy characters or whatever. It's interesting, you know, to look at the history of how these characters change for specific projects and stuff, right? Like, you know, you compare like this version of Daphne to Be Cool Scooby-Doo's version of Daphne, who's like literally insane, right? And I don't know, that's kind of fun, right? But it's just sort of like, these are such drastic character changes, right? That like, no matter how much the show is doing to add like depth to these new versions of the characters, which I do think that they do a pretty good job of, it still doesn't help because it still kind of feels like character assassination, right? Especially with that bit of at the end of episode 2 with like Velma roasting like Fred for no real good reason. I mean, I get that these are the first 2 episodes, but it's gonna take a lot to like get us to really like these characters. I do want to say though that I do really like Shaggy for some reason. Like, he's super divergent from like classic Shaggy in a lot of really specific ways. The only thing that kind of retains is, I guess, as a homage to Mystery Incorporated, is that he has a crush on Velma, which this isn't really necessarily the case, right? I mean, I guess it was kind of like reciprocal in Mystery Incorporated, but like, I don't know. I think this is my least favorite thing about Shaggy in this show. I'm not really too big on the whole like friend zone thing, but Shaggy is fun though. He's just a sweet lad who just wants to do the right thing and be good and wholesome or whatever. He's also bizarrely like smart, right? Like, everyone else is saying like benign meta commentary pulp culture nonsense. He's the only person who's like contributing stuff to like the actual mysteries and like bringing up theories and stuff, which I think is kind of crazy. I mean, it's not like Shaggy can't contribute to like a mystery or whatever. They do a pretty good job of that in Mystery Incorporated, but like, I don't know, I think it's kind of fun, right? I don't know, if the Daphne Velma ship is gonna be endgame, I think it'd be totally rad if like Shaggy's crush on Velma like goes away, right? I think the worst thing they could probably do is like turn Shaggy into like a clingy incel dude that like Velma has to like shoot in the leg and push off a cliff or something. I'd be very disappointed. Shaggy's my best friend. I only wish the best for him. I love Shaggy. Yeah, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that they do with the characters and setting up foundations for them to grow and develop. I like that even though they turn like Fred into a shallow rich dude, right? They also allow him to have like these interesting like insecurities about his masculinity, and then you also find out that Daphne has much more noble intentions for some of the things that she's starting to do. And I don't know, I think there's some really interesting things that they're doing with these characters in this intro phase that I think could make for a really interesting take on the Mystery Inc. gang. I think the one thing that's like really wants me to let this thing like grow into something better, it's just the fact that I really would like to see a serialized Scooby-Doo show, right? I gotta get around to making a video on Mystery Incorporated, but TLDR, I think Mystery Incorporated is really cool. It's not the greatest Scooby-Doo show, but it is very much a pioneer of the serialized format that we see a lot with shows that people love, like, Gravity Falls, Owl House, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Amphibia, like stuff like that, right? Like, I felt like it was kind of one of those first big shows that everybody like could really gravitate to. My big issue with that was that it was a really good serialized show and a really good Scooby-Doo show, but it wasn't good at doing both at the same time, right? Like, Mystery Incorporated had some really, like, iconic monsters and mysteries. Like, they were just really, like, S-tier stuff, like, really cool stuff, right? But it really felt like they didn't have enough time to let those, like, individual episodic mysteries, like, cook, right? Because they had to also make space for the larger mystery and character exploration and all that stuff. So the individual mysteries might have had a really cool monster, but it didn't have like a lot of really like engaging suspects or whatever, so that the mystery itself could be really interesting, right? At the same time, right, especially once you get into like the second season, a lot of like the more serialized elements got really feel like they get kind of tacked on. Like, it feels like they have to do like the episodic mysteries, so then all of a sudden, like at the last like 5 minutes, some small thing ends up contributing to the main story, until they end up ditching like the episodic stuff and they just go full into like the serialization stuff. But like, I don't know, it's really frustrating because on one hand you're getting a really cool Scooby-Doo like episode with a really cool monster mystery, but at the same time it's like the mystery isn't as interesting, and you also want to get into like the larger story, and you kind of feel like you're wasting your time even though you're getting like really cool stuff. So it's kind of like, I just feel like it's a flawed show, but it's also a show with a lot of promise that sometimes it does deliver on. And it's kind of like, I'd love to see this take where a show just sticks in its lane. Like, we're gonna do a serialized show, we're gonna have character development, and even if that means we're not going to be traditional, we're just going to do that. And I don't know, I think Velma's doing a pretty decent job at trying to do that. Yeah, it's going to be like, bog standard, we got to find our mom, murder mystery or whatever. But like, I don't know, I think there's some promise to that. I didn't talk about the visuals. I think that this show looks pretty nice. I think it's doing that thing where like it has a pretty simple like character design style, but it has a lot of fluidity where it needs. I really like all the hallucinations. They give a lot of really fun Mystery Incorporated vibes. I like the angular design of like Velma's mom hallucination. I like the neon colors and light and backlighting and stuff. And yeah, I also really like all the redesigns of all the characters and stuff, and the way that they changed them up and stuff. I think everybody looks really nice. I like all the actors who are portraying all these characters. I think they're all doing pretty decent job at like the roles that they're doing. And I don't know, I don't vibe with like a whole lot of the humor, but I think there are some gags that I think are really funny. I like the bit where like Velma comes back to school after supposedly getting rid of her hallucinations, and everyone's like throwing stuff at her, and one dude like throws one of those like paper cutters that you see in like art class, and then like Fred catches it and he throws it back at the dude, and then it cuts off his leg. And then when like Velma and Daphne are getting chased by the cops, they bump into that dude again and his leg falls off again. In that same episode, there's also another gag where like Daphne confronts Velma, and like there's like one of the chicks in the gang are like using the bathroom, so they keep on flushing the toilet and interrupting like Daphne's rant. And then like you see her walk over to like wash her hands and dry her hands, and then like join the posse. I don't know, like I think the show can get pretty stupid, but like in a really fun way, right? And I think it'd be kind of fun for them to lean into that, like that weird like absurdist stuff that they could do. I'm not too heartbroken about there not being any Scoob, right? Like, the last thing I need is a talking dog making pop culture references, but like having a dog be Shaggy's only friend and him taking it to school all the time would be kind of funny, right? Just a regular dog, and like no one really thinks about it. Like, that would be kind of the thing I'd like to see, right? So you can like still balance that stuff out without it being super obnoxious, right? Geez Louise, did I talk for 30 minutes about this show, right? Insane. Yeah, so what's the verdict? What is the verdict on Velma, right? My verdict is we should just let her cook, right? We should let Velma Dinkley cook. I think what I'd like to see, right, is I'd like to see the show sort of gain some focus, right? Just like not try too hard on like the humor side, right? It's got a lot of potential to be a really fun, interesting like mystery show, right? But I think if they can find some focus on that, focus on giving us good foundations for these characters' journeys and stuff, then I think we could see something that everyone can vibe with, right? Always something that I think kind of stands on its own and people can actually appreciate. Or at the very least, it can make for a very interesting train wreck, right? Yeah, so that is it. That is the end of this very bad video. If you enjoyed my talking and all of my reaction images, you can stick around and subscribe. I got some really cool stuff for the rest of the year, and I hope you stick around. Okay, I love you. Bye-bye.